am Madeline, and this is my presentation on degrowth. So degrowth is a rejection of the illusion of growth and a call to repoliticize the public debate colonized by the idiom of economism. It is a project advocating the democratically led shrinking of production and consumption with the aim of achieving social justice and ecological sustainability. Economic growth is the prime objective and a foundation of our current capitalistic society. Money is intended and is continually gained both by individuals as well as from a governmental standpoint, business, corporate. But degrowth rejects this idea and insists that it is an unsustainable model. Degrowth calls for a collective shift away from our continual consumption of natural resources, in turn lowering our reliance on energy and raw materials. So currently in our society, above the level of economic growth required to satisfy all basic personal needs, any increased amount of wealth is invested in what's called positional goods. These can be material or otherwise, they can be services like cars, education, real estate. They're often things that are generally intended to convey one's economic status. So usually they're things that depend on your income level. Such things are by definition scarce. Like if everyone had an expensive car, it's no longer a symbol of wealth. And that concept is key to understanding how growth itself functions. This practice is actually made less accessible by growth. As the material component of the economy gets more productive, positional consumption becomes more expensive, resulting in the quite drastic income divide that we're seeing in our society today. The promise of growth, however, is currently the only way in which the illusion of upward social mobility can be sustained, albeit temporarily, without actively redistributing wealth. So it makes sense to pursue wealth from a personal level, since that is the system that we currently are residing in, but collectively, continuous growth is a zero-sum game. It wastes resources. In affluent societies like our own, a high proportion of social income is wasted on positional consumption, while public goods that would improve the quality of life for all are ignored and left to deteriorate. As well, time is budgeted and quantified in money. It puts a price on free time. It also commodifies goods and services unnecessarily, things like education, even really simple things like entrance fees for parks and beaches. What this all means is that once the level of wealth in which basic necessities are met is reached, increased economic growth does nothing for our well-being, but instead deteriorates it for the majority of the population. Affluence grows further and further out of reach for most, while a select few gain exorbitant amounts of wealth. And therefore the drive for increased wealth grows, and it's kind of a terrible cycle. So not only this, but growth is already declining. Research suggests it's inevitably going to decline or even collapse, whether this is due to diminishing material and energy stocks or restriction from climate change or even economic collapse. Either way, economic growth is tied to energy and therefore to fossil fuels and will only become more unsustainable over time. We can choose to plan this descent and use it to our advantage, or it can take advantage of us. Degrowth will make positional goods less expensive, increasing well-being and releasing collective resources from unnecessary consumption. It would mean an improvement and increased access to basic goods like education, healthcare, public infrastructure. It would mean more people have access to what they need and less people have access to what they don't. But the key point is that within this current system of growth, sustainable energy use is impossible. As long as increased profits are the goal, increased consumption and increased energy use is going to be the result. In order to actually decrease energy usage, supply and demand have to decrease. We have to let go of this continual growth. So shifting to a degrowth model is necessary to shape society into a sustainable way of living in the future. So what has to change? Collectively, we'll have to start a shift to producing things for our own use as opposed to producing them for a profit. Exchanging of goods would still be present, but as a part of an anti-utilitarian logic, that's going to be necessary to adopt. It would look like exchanging reciprocal offerings instead of receiving payment, at least partially. An increase in unpaid labor and voluntary participation, which will reduce the commodification and specialization of labor itself. And true degrowth will require the lack of the current culture of constant accumulation and expansion on a social level. Some practices already exist that could help us adopt these changes and transition to a degrowth economy. Some of these are a guaranteed minimum standard of economic security for everyone. So in order to begin redistributing wealth, there needs to be a system in place to ensure everyone has enough to meet their basic needs. Aside from the massive social benefits, this could actually reduce or abolish other systems such as welfare, childcare benefits, pensions, and there would also need to be an upper limit to wealth to avoid the stratification that we're seeing today. A shrinking economy will inevitably lead to less working hours. In planned intentional degrowth, work hours are shared among all to avoid unemployment. Community currencies are local monies generally not recognized as official legal tender. It can also really broadly include systems like bartering. It keeps wealth circulating in small communities and it doesn't require external trade. Cooperatives, essentially a business situation in which people become members of and in turn have a democratic say in how the co-op is run. But these memberships do not gain or lose value like stock market shares, making the system more suitable for degrowth. Co-ops are under absolutely no obligation to maximize profit for their shareholders. And civic agriculture refers to food production with a focus on reconnecting farm, food, and community. This will be seen in lots of forms. Small eco-communities will definitely be a strong way forward into degrowth. The reality is that many urban structures and urban livers are going to remain in place. So urban gardening is going to play a role as well. What both these practices really do is they decrease the distance between production and consumption for such a basic necessity as food. They have significantly lower carbon footprints than the way food is produced now. And they also have the potential to ensure food is available and affordable to everyone. It'll limit the expansion and exploitation of agribusiness that we're seeing today. And also in capitalism, debt is used to keep the masses under control of power and working wage labor. Debt is also actually a fueler of economic growth, as we all might understand a little better now, having witnessed the recent GameStop phenomenon. Debt audit movements propose to examine these systems and their debts and eliminate debts caused by an abuse of power. In a widespread context, this would drastically slow capitalistic growth. But there are also ways to embrace degrowth in your own day-to-day life. While most of these ideas are not new, they're only half practiced by most of us, if at all, and they need to be embraced fully and wholeheartedly by the public if we're going to move forward into a sustainable future. And also, many of these options are not suitable to every individual right now. Like, I can't start producing biogas in my apartment. You can't cycle 2 towns away for work to avoid cars completely. But these are all things that as a society, we are going to have to adjust to in the near future. Small steps like these ones are going to have a significant role to play in creating the socio-cultural conditions needed for an energy descent future to be managed well. And that is all. Thank you.